Welcome back to another Prep Baseball Illinois podcast. Today we are discussing the IHSA and recapping last week. Kind of first things off, let's talk about the player of the week last week. Him, you want to kind of go through that for us?
Yeah, so I'll start with the pitcher of the week. We had Tyler Zuber from Mount Zion. He's a senior going to Lakeland. Right-handed pitcher. He threw a 6-inning no-hitter, punched out 6, only needed 85 pitches, only threw 85 balls, and they won 10-0. So happy for Tyler there. And then Nate Stempowski was our position player of the week. He had a good week going 7 for 8, had a home run triple, 3 doubles, and 7 RBIs. He actually hit for the cycle in their 18-3 win over South Elgin. First at bat of the game was a home run. Then he had a double, a 2 RBI double actually. Then a triple, and then he capped it off with a single. 6 RBIs on that day. So good for Nate Stempowski there. McHenry County commit. He's also a senior.
Yeah, so we release our player of the weeks each Tuesday. So anytime you guys can, just submit your best players of the week, and we'll kind of go through each week, and we'll each vote on who we think the player of the week should be. And, the guys that didn't get mentioned in that story will be put on our Diamond Notes, which is released on Wednesday. So be sure to get your guys into that. But, now kind of moving on to the Power 25, a lot of shifting happening. A lot of teams really, staying really hot, but then there's some teams that, maybe not so hot. They're kind of off to some bad starts. So kind of, Drew, take us through that top 10 and some of those teams that are, really looking good, and maybe some of the teams that are, kind of falling for us.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. You hit on it a little bit there. There's some teams with some good records, and then there were a lot of teams just going through it that a lot of 500, 4-4, 3-4, 5-4, 5-5, 6-6 within our Power 25, and it made it really, really hard. There were a couple dynamics with this week that made it very difficult. Updating the rankings for the first time, we purposely waited to make sure that some teams got some more games under their belt, help, make it a little more clear cut, and I don't think it did that. With this past week being spring break, a ton of these schools went on spring trips, played a lot of teams from out of state, which always adds a different dynamic and element to looking at these rankings, because a big part of it is strength of schedule. It makes it very difficult to really gauge the strength of a team's schedule when it's teams that are from Alabama, California, Arizona, all over the country that these guys are playing, and we're trying to figure out who the best teams are, really, when it comes down to it. Who are the best teams? Who deserve to be in the Power 25? And I think that's what we try to do, is we're trying to figure out who truly deserves to be in there, with the strength of their roster, strength of schedule, strength of, wins, losses, all that stuff. And this first week, of updating the rankings, we're seeing a lot of movement. 6 teams that we had ranked preseason in the Power 25 are dropping out, which means 6 new teams are coming in. So there was a lot of movement. I think the highest newcomers jumping in at number 12. And looking at the top 10, just a quick rundown on the top 10. Our preseason Power 25 number 2, Nazareth, who was right behind Edwardsville. Nazareth, who is now in 4A this year, they are 11-0. They had a 4-0 week. They are 11-0. They are looking strong, and right behind them, a team that in a lot of people's minds could potentially be the number 1 team in the state. They have one of the harder strength of schedules. If you match up their strength of schedule right now versus Nazareth, Joliet Catholic's played some harder teams, and Joliet Catholic is number 2, and they're 8-0. They're coming off a 4-0 week. We touched on how good they looked at the Kickoff Classic, and they just kept it going this past week. They played in the WJOL, which is a bunch of good teams from the southwest suburbs, and they won it for the second year in a row. They knocked off Lockport 6-5, Providence Catholic 10-1, which Providence was our preseason number 3, and then they took down Manuka, who is they were our preseason number 8. They're at number 7 right now, and they beat them 5-4 to take the championship. Outside of them, St. Lawrence is making a pretty big jump from number 7 to number 3. They're 7-1 right now, coming off a 4-0 week. Some other noteworthy teams, as I mentioned, Minooka's jumping one spot. Downers Grove North, they went down to Tennessee, played in a tournament. They went 2-1 on the week. They are sitting at 6-1 on the season. We liked them before the season. We have yet to see them in person, but our Tennessee guys did. They've got a good offense, trying to get enough on the mound, but they are up 6 spots to number 8. They are at 6-1. And then one newcomer here in the top 10 is Lake Park, outside of Downers Grove North. Lake Park, they jumped 8 spots from number 18 to number 10, and they're sitting at 5-1. And full disclosure, tough one to evaluate. They went out west on a spring trip down to Arizona and played a bunch of teams outside of Illinois, and it was their opening week to the season. So they have yet to play a team in Illinois. We are jumping them. They're full of seniors. We like their squad. You know, they are well coached. They're good year in, year out, and they are up to number 10 right now. So that's just a quick look at the top 10, Gavin. I'm sure there's some stuff we missed here, but yeah, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, so looking at a few teams outside of the top 10, I mean, the first one, Normal Community, they're 9-0, 4-0 week. They beat number 9 Gardendale over in Alabama. So just, you know, they're full of arms. We mentioned them a lot last week. A lot of senior talent. So really good team to watch there. And I mean, they're making a huge jump here at number 11 now. And then Libertyville, they're number 13. They had a 3-1 week. You know, they have a really solid team too. So just another team to watch there that's, you know, moving up a couple spots to number 13. And then I'll pass this over to Tyler here. Sycamore, they're 4-0. Tyler was able to see them last week as they beat number 25 Hananega, but Sycamore is now at number 23. So Tyler, what do you got on Sycamore?
Yeah, outside of the WJOL that happened last week, this was probably one of the few Power 25 matchups that happened in the state, and played on Friday morning out in Sycamore, and Sycamore handled Hananega with ease. Teague Hallahan, right-hander for Sycamore, who's committed to Lakeland, was super impressive on the mound. Gave them a really quality start, and they never looked back. And, you know, Sycamore didn't make a huge jump, but they're a very solid team. Their outfield is super impressive with Kyle Preble in left, Colin Severson in center, and William Klump in right. So we're going to keep seeing how they progress.
Yeah, and they're a good team. I mean, they're a team that made it to state last year in 3A. You know, losing to Nazareth, I think, in the semifinal game. But and kind of like Drew mentioned, you know, there's a lot of new teams too in our Power 25. You know, the first one we're looking at here is Mascoutah. You know, they're up to number 12. And I know Diego has seen them quite a bit. So, Deeks, what do you got on Mascoutah there?
Yeah, we kind of touched on them briefly at the Kickoff Classic, but they're 9-1. Their only loss came to SLU High in Missouri, which is off to a good start. They're just on the bubble on our PBR Missouri rankings. You know, Mascoutah, they're an upper class heavy team. Basically, their entire starting lineup is either a junior or a senior. A lot of those guys are back from last year's group that was also highly successful. We've touched on Austin Musso a few times. He's about as good of a frontline arm as you'll find in the entire state. Behind him, they have arms like Wyatt Beer, who's a strike-throwing senior. Darren Klein, a freshman that we've seen twice now, both in relief, both times really good. Upper 70s, low 80s, comes out clean, strike thrower. I saw him come into a one-run game and throw 3 innings and pound nothing but the strike zone. Chase Rotman is a highly competitive senior that'll pitch for them in the low 80s and can spin a breaking ball. And, you know, they're your typical Mascoutah team. They're well coached. They run the bases well. They're not going to beat themselves. Across the infield, they're sound defensively. They're very good behind the plate with Grant Reinick, senior going to Lewis and Clark, that can really catch. So, you know, they were in our Power 25 last year. They look just as good, if not better. I would view them as legitimate contenders in Class 3A, and a team that's probably going to make some noise the rest of the year.
Yeah, so moving down the list, you know, Lincoln Way West, another team new to the rankings. They're at number 14. So, Drew, what do you have on Lincoln Way West?
Yeah, quality squad. We did maybe touch on them on our first podcast, just about how they were a mainstay in the top 10 last year. They lost a couple pieces with graduation, but man, they look just as strong as last year, potentially. They are a team that we have not seen in person yet this year, but they went down to Lake Point for their spring trip, and they're 6-0. Potentially, probably warranted being in the rankings preseason. We went other directions, but here you go, first update of the year, and they jump right in. They're led by Connor Essenberg on the mound offensively. Lucas Acevedo, a UIC commit. Seen a couple names. Ben Shea is a name I've seen in their box score quite a bit, who he was fighting for time last year, but he's helped them on the infield and also on the mound from what I've seen. With what they've played back home, they've taken down Homewood Flossmoor 8-6 on the early part of the season, and Marist 5-2 back here at home. But we will see on them. They are one of the, I guess, the highest newcomers on our list here at number 14.
Yeah, and then we got Fenwick. They're coming in at number 15 on the list. They're 6-0 this week. Last year they were in a super sectional game. Team making a jump for us. A lot of good wins this week. They beat number 16 Libertyville 8-2 this year. So just a team to watch that we kind of had making a climb here this year. And then Hammett, Crystal Lake South 6-0. They're coming in at number 16. What do you got on them?
Yeah, they're a team that kind of stand out every single day going through the roundup. It seems like they do nothing but put up a crazy amount of runs each game. They're 6-0. Going over their 6 games, they scored 9 runs, 15 runs, 14 runs, 25 runs, 14 runs, and then 19 runs. So when you're scoring that much, it's kind of hard to lose. So we'll see if they can keep that going throughout the rest of the year. But yeah, they're 6-0 right now, sliding in at number 16.
That's a program up in that Fox Valley area that's definitely created some history over the last couple of years. They won the state title in 2017. They're well coached by Brian Bogda every single year. They always have guys in and out. Every season they kind of are off our radar, and then they pop up on it midway through the year. And when late May, early June rolls around, they're playing for a super sectional. So watch out for Crystal Lake South.
There we go. Coach Bogda's group. I was just going to touch on Fenwick, and you made mention of how they beat Libertyville. Or I'm looking at their schedule here, and I know they beat Libertyville, who's our number. They were a preseason number 16, and they jumped to number 13. And Fenwick climbs in at number 15, which is a whole nother dynamic to these rankings that make it very, very difficult on figuring out where to slot teams. First week of the year, if Fenwick and Libertyville play each other and it's the only games they've played all year and Fenwick wins, on paper, it looks like Fenwick's the better team. Maybe they deserve to be over them, and maybe they do. Maybe they do. Fenwick's 6-0, Libertyville's 5-2-1. Maybe we're making a mistake keeping Fenwick behind. As of right now, we have not seen Fenwick. We're not as familiar overall with their entire roster as we are Libertyville. I know personally a lot more players on that Libertyville lineup and just a lot more quality looks at those players than I have with Fenwick. So until we get a in-person look at Fenwick, until we build up just a little bit more of a track record on them, it was a hard one on knowing where to slot them. And I think a lot of it comes down to confidence levels and just really digging through who they've beaten, who they've lost to. And I just wanted to touch on that, Gavin, because this is not a perfect science. Doing these rankings is very difficult. And that's why we need the season to just continue to take place so that it can just be proven on the field. These teams will eventually sort themselves out just by their wins and losses throughout the season. And also once they get into conference play, when a team's ace is matching up against another team's ace, a number 2's matching up against another 2, it just makes it a lot cleaner. Right now, we don't know if Fenwick or Lincoln Way West is going down on a spring trip, and Lincoln Way West may be on their 4th game in 5 days, and they're throwing their number 7 against Alabama, a team from Alabama who's throwing their number 1 on their first day of a spring trip. So it is just really, really difficult. Adds quite the dynamic to figuring this all out. And I just wanted to make note of that.
Yeah, and like you said, it's difficult for us. I mean, we're on 1.5, 2-hour calls every Monday morning to really solidify this. So it's definitely something that we really look into and make sure we're trying to do it right. So, but another team, Monticello, they're a 2A school in Central Illinois. They're coming in at number 17, 14-0. I mean, there's a lot of talented 2A schools in this Central Illinois area. I got to see them last week, and I texted you guys instantly and said, I think these are one of the top 2A teams in the state. So, I mean, you look at their team. I mean, they got Luke Teschke, Super 60 kid. He's going to Illinois State. I mean, anytime that kid takes the mound, I really think Monticello is going to be a team that can compete with a ton of these teams that we have ranked here. I mean, they have Eli Kraft, really good catcher. Matt Swartz just popped up for us the other day, left-handed hitter, outfielder, junior, uncommitted. They've got a lot of talented players. Good team last year, and a lot of them are coming back. So, good lineup. Going to be one to watch here, and one that I really think can compete and have a really big year and make a deep run in 2A. So that's Monticello. We got Joliet West. They're coming in at number 25, entering the rankings for the first time this year. And Tyler and Hammond have both seen them. So kind of what do you guys have on them? Let's take us through it.
Yeah, I mean, with Joliet West, what's nice is, outside of like maybe a Joliet Catholic, we've seen Joliet West a ton so far this year. Not only myself, but Peter's seen them, and even Diego's seen them. They really jumped on our radar first weekend down at the Kickoff Classic. They knocked off O'Fallon at their own ballpark, and they held their own against a really talented arm in Michael Barker out of O'Fallon. And their lineup is just absolutely stacked, and it's a veteran one at that as well, with Owen Young, James Love, Jimmy Anderson, just to highlight a few guys on that squad. But they're playing tough competition as well. So only 2 losses to 2 top 20 teams, so or 2 top 10 teams, last week in the WJOL. So they're playing good ball right now, and I'll let Hammett add in whatever he wants here.
Yeah, no, it's a really offensive heavy group, but they actually have more arms than we thought, or at least that I thought. They'll go to Jimmy Anderson, who will be mid-upper 80s. They'll go to James Love in the later innings. He'll be upper 80s. They brought out a right-hander, senior Procise. He was I think every single fastball he threw was 85, and he had a good little slider, so he's nice out of the pen for them. And yeah, it's just a deep, scrappy lineup. I know they lost, 7-0 to Manuka. I was at that game. But I could still just tell, just watching them, they passed the eye test. It's a very talented group, hard-nosed kids. Not worried at all. I think they'll bounce right back, and they'll be just fine and throughout the rest of the year.
And if you guys don't mind me pigging off of that, what Tyler brought up there with playing 2 top 10 teams last week, their 2 losses were against top 10 teams. I think that's the dynamic here. They're sitting at 7-3, and they're jumping in the rankings for the first time, and they're jumping some teams with better records. On paper, there's a 10-0 squad that we're jumping. Andrew is 9-1. We're going to touch on some of these bubble teams. A lot of teams at 5-0, undefeated. Conant's one of those teams. They're 5-0. Highland Park's 8-3 with a couple Power 25 wins. So there's a lot of teams that can catch your eye if you're just looking at it on paper. Luckily for us, and one of the reasons why we chose to go with Joliet West is that last team in is we've seen them a bunch. We know their track record, how they were last year. Looking at them on paper, looking across the infield, they have one of the top infields in the state, defensively and offensively. If you just package those guys together, they can pretty much all pick it and they can all swing it. And their 2 losses this week were against 2 really quality teams, and they could have, not played in the WJOL or picked up some easy games against some easy wins, and they'd be sitting at 9-1 right now and maybe be higher on the list. But that's what we're looking at, is not just 11-0, 4-0, 7-1. It's really digging into the wins and the losses. And And what were the wins like? What were the losses like? Who'd they throw on the losses? And all of that plays a role. So I think that's a really good point by Tyler, and something that can be overlooked if you just look up and down our list of Power 25 teams. You look at Edwardsville, they're 4-5, and we slotted them at number 6. Did they deserve to still be at number 1? Absolutely not. They need to drop. How far did they need to drop? That's probably the hardest question. Because at the Kickoff Classic, we mentioned it on our last IHSA podcast, they played nothing but top 6 teams in the state. All 3 games they played were against the top 6 teams in the state. And then they go on a spring trip down to Alabama, and they're playing Hoover, they're playing Auburn, they're playing teams that are highly ranked in Alabama, good programs. Now, we would love to see them, beat those teams and have a better record, but we're just not going to totally fall off the Tigers train just because they're 4-5. I mean, we touched on it. They're not scared. They're going to play good teams, and we've seen them. We know what they looked like out there on the field, how they played the game, the arms they're throwing out there. And I'm betting on the fact that, they're going to make a run here at some point to make that 4-5 record look a lot better than it is. But right now we saw them at number 6, and yeah, you could say they could be at 15. You could say they could be out of the whatever you want, but that's what we've seen, and that's where our confidence is on them, and that's why we slotted them where we slotted them.
Yeah, totally, Drew. And I think you kind of touch on a good point here. Looking at some of these other teams that have dropped in our rankings. Brother Rice down to number 19. They were a top 5 team for us to start the year, and I think some of these teams that we've dropped, we feel comfortable with their, they have a quality roster, they have good teams, but, their records don't completely show it. So I think that's kind of a big reason why they're dropped, but they're still in the rankings. All right, so looking outside the Power 25 here, we've got a lot of teams to watch, and that's what makes it really hard about these rankings is kind of like Drew mentioned before, a team like Andrew, they're 9-1. How do you slot them into the rankings? Do we give them some more time? But kind of going down this list that we have, Andrew 9-1, Lane Tech 7-2, Father McGivney 7-1, Geneva 7-0, Highland Park 8-3, Conant 5-0, Morton 5-1, York 5-1, Prospect 5-1, McHenry 5-1, Lakes Community 5-1, Grant 5-1, Jacobs 5-1, and then Lions is 4-0. We have Sacred Heart Griffin 10-0. They're a 2A school down in Springfield area. Effingham's 8-1. Niles Notre Dame 6-1, Sandburg's 5-1, and they've had some really big wins so far this year. St. Joseph Ogden's 11-2, another Central Illinois 2A school. Oak Forest is 7-2, and then we've got Nashville. They're 11-0, and they're a 1A school down there in Southern Illinois. So, I mean, Diego, do you kind of want to take us through Father McGivney a little bit? I mean, they're a really good team. They had a good year last year, down to 1A now. So,
yeah, we touched on them briefly last weekend too, but they went down to Tennessee for their spring trip to play in the same tournament that they won last year. They beat Edwardsville in the championship game last year, made a run back to it in that same tournament's bracket, matched up against IMG Academy's second team, which is, as you might expect, still very good. And they lost to them 8-5 in the championship game, and in a pretty hard-fought battle from what it looked like. They beat Bennett Academy at the Kickoff Classic on a walk-off grand slam. So that's a quality win for the Griffins. And, I mentioned this last week, but they are a 1A school. They were 2A last year. It's a very small school in Glen Carbon, just 10 or so minutes outside of Edwardsville, down here in the Metro East. Their roster is very good. They're a 3A, 4A roster in terms of talent and depth. I would expect them to be probably the betting favorite to be the 1A state champions at the end of the year. Nicholas Franklin, senior, going to Longwood. Isaac Wendler hits cleanup for them, first baseman, one of the top sophomore first basemen in the state. Omar Avalos was a PBR Junior Future Games alumni. He's inside our top 20 for the 2027 class rankings. A true leadoff, top-of-the-order type left-handed bat that can really run in center field. They have Cannon Camp and Drew Kleinheider up the middle of the field. Two guys that'll hit above 450 for them and flat out pick it. So that roster is really good. They're going to make some noise. Briefly here, some of the teams you touched on. Sacred Heart Griffin, they're 10-0. Effingham, just saw them this past week. Caden Nichols, Colton Webb, good 1-2 punch for them on the mound, both strike throwers. Camden Raditz going to Kaskaskia. He's a senior. that's been a part of that program for a long time. Starting shortstop, hits in the 3-hole, was all over the barrel for 5 hits on Saturday in a conference doubleheader. And that's a program that went to 3A state last year. St. Joseph Ogden is always good. 2A program in that Springfield area too. They've made a couple state runs. They have Luke Landris, a catcher, going to Illinois behind the plate. He'll pitch it for them too in the upper 80s. That's a program that's got a pretty rich history of winning. And you can say the same thing about Nashville, another team that's always good. Just saw them last week against Waltonville Cesar-Valier. Well-coached team. They're off to a good start, 11-0. So there's some teams with some pretty good records and some pretty good talent that are knocking on the door here. And I know we'll touch on, as a collective group, more of them. So definitely some teams to watch here.
Yeah, Drew, you look at Morton. 5-1. They got Ryan Schaffnet, Tanner Spangler. They're predominantly one of those top teams in the Peoria area. Year in, year out, winning some games.
Yeah, and just listening to Diego go through Father McGivney, they're going to find their way in the Power 25. I would almost bet on it. That's too good of a lineup, especially when you start talking about 1A and what a lot of those teams have. That's really impressive down there. So we look at Father McGivney not like a 1A school. They are just a good program. And Morton, you touched on it. Year in and year out, there's a handful of teams, I think, that you could always say are going to be some of the top teams in Central Illinois. Morton's right there. Coach Jesse Crawford does a really good job. They're going to be well coached. It's kind of bred down there in Morton, I feel like. It kind of the same way as Edwardsville. It's almost like a feeder program. Those guys at a young age, they're pumped. They cannot wait to play Morton baseball when they get into high school. So they're 5-1, like you mentioned. You mentioned a couple of their players. Having those arms on the mound, it's always going to give them a chance to win there. A couple other teams that have caught my eye that definitely tracking. Andrew 9-1. We mentioned them on the last call, but they've got Jack Lacani, Jackson Ugo. They've got Caden and Joshua Kendall. They've got a couple other guys on their roster as well. I think they're really going to hit. That's what the early indications are saying. They did get a Power 25 win as well in the year, so they were in discussion for jumping into the Power 25 this update. We'll have to make it a point to get out and see them. Lane Tech. They've got a lot of talent up and down that roster with Ethan Borgren. We mentioned them last week as well with, Sushi Wilson, Sebastian Wilson, freshman to watch. Conant is a team that you mentioned. They're 5-0, and they are a sleeper team for me with Bryce Loger on the mound. And I am blanking right now, but he had 3 home runs last week. Jake Parpet. Sorry. Catcher, infielder, can really hit 3 home runs in a game last week, from what I understand. So, if I'm wrong with that, if it was over the course of the week, I apologize, Jake, but I know you had 3 home runs. I know Conant's 5-0, and he's a Heartland commit, and they're a squad to watch. Lions is 4-0. Just had a big win over Brother Rice. They also have talent on that roster. They've got Tucker King on the mound. They've got a freshman in their lineup as well with Blake Ragsdale. They've got Nathan Anderson on the mound. They've got Brady Chambers on the mound. So he's a Michigan State commit. They've got a lot of pieces that we're paying close attention to. Sandberg's 5-1, another program that's always solid, always in the mix. They're going to be on our radar as well. So it's just a lot of teams to look at. Those were a couple that I was keying in on. I'm not sure who else has some teams that caught their eye.
Yeah, him. And you got Geneva here, 4-0. They had the player of the week in Nate Simpowski. And then, York, they got Ryan Sloan, potential first-round draft pick.
Yeah. Well, Geneva's, they went 4-0 on the week. Now they're 6-0. Obviously, Simpowski helped them get to 2-0 on the first week. So it's good to see them keep rolling in the second week. And then York, 5-1. We were talking about it earlier on the Rankins call. They're just going to get better the more and more that Ryan Sloan can pitch, the more innings he can throw as he builds his arm up. So, they're 5-1 right now, and just like I said, with him, when they get the more Ryan Sloan they can get, the better they're going to be, basically. And then they got Chris Dankel going to Illinois State, Josh Fleming on the infield. So they got some guys around the lineup too that we really like.
Yeah, and Tyler, you got Highland Park down there, or up there, sorry. Luke Weber, good arm, and then McHenry, Brandon Shannon, and Caden Wisniewski. Just a lot of arms here.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Highland Park had an awesome first week, knocking off two of our preseason Power 25 teams. They're sitting at 8-3 right now. And you touched on it, Luke Weber going to Illinois. He's going to give them a chance to win every time he takes the ball. He's a gamer, right-handed arm. With McHenry, if you listen to our rankings podcast from last week, if you haven't, I implore you to go listen to it, where Drew talked about how Brandon Shannon could be the next Blake Walters potentially. So for McHenry, they have him, and then they also have Caden Wisniewski, who's a super talented freshman arm as well. So, and they're sitting at 5-1. So those are just some more teams to watch.
All right, well, that will conclude our second IHSA podcast here. This is our first rankings update, official rankings update of the year. So, be sure to follow us on all of our socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to keep coming out with these podcasts weekly. And then as our player rankings start coming out, we'll have a player rankings podcast as well for the 26s and 27s. So just be sure to follow along and to stay up to date with all of our high school season coverage.